If you've ever drilled tile or glass, you already know this is the part that can get expensive fast. One bad start, one crack, one chipped edge, and the piece you pay for is done for. So I tested Spyder's Diamond Edge on ceramic, porcelain, and glass to see what actually happened in a real bench setup. These are Spyder's Diamond Edge hole saw bits. They're claiming up to 20 times more and up to 10 times faster. You're able to drill through tile, granite and marble, glass, and it has a 1/4 inch hex. Now, here's the thing. I would suggest that 1/4 inch hex, although you could chuck it into an impact driver, no concussive impacts, no impact driver, no hammer drills. Or if you're using a hammer drill, make sure it's not in hammer mode. Here's the very important part. Instruction says use wet or dry. Fast drill, no contact. Now, if you were going to do the method where you're freehanding onto a tile, you're gonna start at a 45-degree angle, freewheeled. You'll then bring the bit in contact with the tile, and then as we're drilling that hole, we're gonna tilt up. You have this open cut here, and it's great to help extract the core once you're done drilling the holes, but I find it's great for using a spray bottle to shoot cooling water into the center of the bit. Using water also helps to remove the slurry or the material you're drilling through. It will create a slurry. Using more water will drive that slurry out of the hole to make way for the diamonds to make contact with the material. Next, we have Spyder's diamond cups, and we have their carbide-tipped arbor to use in conjunction with these cups. Once again, Spyder's claiming up to 20% more, and it's an auto guide carbide tip. Retractable pin eliminates need to drill pilot holes, quickly and easily allows for plug removal, and the carbide tip prevents skating, accurate hole location, and drilling center. It's up to 10 times faster, and they're claiming 20 times more. The thing that I love about this carbide-tipped arbor system is when you're drilling your hole, this carbide tip's not stationary. It actually springs in and out. So once it's made contact and you have your hole made, your witness mark by the carbide tip, you then push down and then the cup will make contact without this tip needing to go all the way through the tile. This is not a lab test, and it's not a polished product commercial. It's a real-world bench test using the materials I had on hand. My goal was to answer the question a DIYer might actually care about. What worked? What failed? And what would I personally trust before touching finishing materials? I want to start out with ceramic because ceramic ended up being the confidence builder in this whole test. Out of the 5 ceramic runs, all 5 completed. That doesn't mean ceramic is effortless. It means this was the material where the Spyder setup looked the most forgiving. What I like about ceramic here is that it gives us a baseline. Ceramic is literally the softest material. It's not going to be as durable. You're not going to want to use this necessarily in a high traffic commercial area. You could use it in a high traffic home environment. You should be fine with that. So it's always going to be softer and easier to drill. The hole's completed, the process looked more controlled, and this is probably the part of the test that would make the average DIYer feel the least nervous. If somebody asked me which material in this test looked the most approachable, it was ceramic. Not because every run was blazing fast, but because the results were consistent. And consistency is what matters when you're trying not to ruin materials. Now let's get to the material that probably makes most people tense up the fastest. Glass. This is where the clearest lesson from the entire test showed up. Dry glass broke. Wet glass worked. That's the kind of result I love in a test because it gives you a rule you can actually use. It's simple, it's visual, and it matters. This wasn't a subtle difference. When the setup was wet, the glass runs completed. When the setup was dry, the piece broke. And that, to me, is one of the biggest takeaways from the whole video because it shifts the conversation away from hype and into technique. the tools matter, but the setup matters too. On glass especially, the setup can be the difference between a clean hole and a ruined piece. Porcelain's where the test got serious. Ceramic was forgiving. Glass gave us a clear wet versus dry lesson, but porcelain was the material that demanded the most respect. Out of 5 porcelain runs, 4 completed and 1 broke. So this is not a disaster story, but it also was not the kind of material where I'd tell somebody to get casual. What stood out to me about porcelain is that it looked like the material most likely to punish a bad start. Too much pressure, or a setup that wasn't fully under control. This is where the tool, the water, and the drilling method all started to matter more. And for a DIY audience, this is probably the most important part, because porcelain is the kind of material people really hesitate to touch. It's expensive, it's visible, and a bad result can force you to start over. So my read on porcelain is this: these bits can absolutely work here, but this is the material in my testing that earned the most caution. Now let's talk about drilling method, because the timing tells an interesting story, but I want to be careful with it. In this testing, the drill press averaged about 1 minute, 17 seconds. The hand drilling with the pilot averaged about 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Freehand without the pilot averaged about 3 minutes and 7 seconds. Of course, using this setup and freehand drilling is something that you're going to want to master over time. The technique is what really matters here in accomplishing that, so it is going to be a slower process. So yes, the drill press was the fastest setup in this test, but here's the honesty clause. This is not a pure apples to apples method shootout. The drill press work was mostly with the 1-inch setup, while the hand with pilot work was tied more to the larger 2-inch setup. So not take these numbers and turn them into a blanket statement that one method is universally better. What I do think these numbers show is something simpler and more useful. More control generally gave better odds, and less control generally made the job slower and more stressful. So what actually mattered most here? First, the material mattered. Ceramic was forgiving. Porcelain was definitely the toughest. Glass gave the clearest warning. Second, water mattered. The glass result made that impossible to ignore. Third, control mattered. The more stable and predictable the setup felt, the better the results looked. Most people are not drilling tile and glass in a perfect shop environment every day. They're trying to make 1 or 2 holes, avoid ruining material, and get through the job cleanly. So for me, this test became less about raw speed and more about convenience. If you're drilling tile or glass, the takeaway here is pretty simple. Respect the material, pay attention to the setup, and don't assume every surface reacts the same way. And I'd love to know from you, if you were about to drill one of these 3 materials tomorrow, or even today, which one would make you the most nervous? Ceramic, porcelain, or glass? Here's one more important part I want to emphasize. Yes, all these bits say they can be used dry, but you'll extend the life of the bits, the hole saws, and you'll get a better result if you use them wet. So if you have water available, make sure you're using it.